Hey readers, I'm Leandra.
And I'm Danny, and we are not reading for content.
This is a monthly book club podcast dedicated to reading in depth and leaving no plot point unturned. Each month, we read one book over the course of 3 episodes, basically reading one third of the book at a time. Feel free to listen along, or better yet, read the book with us. Our first season of the book club has the theme of genre blends. A list of books and the club schedule will be in the description.
Hello, readers, and welcome back to another episode of Not Reading for Content. We are so excited to have you guys here with us today to discuss the end of the book. We read chapters 18 through the end of the Village Library Demon Hunting Society, and we can't wait to get into all of the details of the ending. But before we start, we do have to do our bookish bite of the week. And this week, Leandra, I would like you to discuss your policy on DNFing. And for those of you listening at home, if you're not familiar with that term, DNF stands for did not finish or do not finish. So when do you not finish a book?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics to discuss with other readers, mainly because it's such a nuanced process. Some people refuse to ever DNF. They're like, when I finish a book, like I'm finishing it. Like when I start it, we're going to the end. And there's no question of, even if I'm hating the book, that I may just put it down and not return to it. I used to be that person mainly because I just never really considered the idea of that being an event. I always thought, okay, I'm just taking longer to get through this book. And if I hate it, I hate it. But now, in recent years, I am so pro DNF that I will DNF a book on the first page. I will just realize that it's not working for me. And I've also DNF'd at, say, like 70%. It doesn't really matter. I know some people have policies surrounding when they DNF. For instance, giving it 50 pages, then checking in, giving it 100 pages, then checking in. But for me, it's just when I'm realizing I'm not enjoying myself and maybe the rating starts going down. And sometimes it's a 3 star. It's a book that's fine that I can see other people enjoying. But for me, I do not see myself being engaged any further. And I kind of just want to preserve my time for 4 star and 5 stars, depending on the type of 3 star I'm working with, especially if I see myself going from 4 to 3. And then if I start getting in 2 star range, I'm usually going to call it quits. How about you,
Yeah.
Danny?
Yeah, I'm similar. I've gotten better at DNFing within the past couple of years just because of the volume of books that I'm reading and really the number of books on my TBR. Because I think before it was more of the completionist in me that I wanted to, especially if I'm purchasing a book. And I've gotten better about using my library. And so if I'm not purchasing a book, if I don't have it in my collection, I am very, very easy to DNF at this point just because there's too many books and so little time. And so I think that it is very dependent on probably my rating in my mind if I'm reading it or if I'm bored, because a 3 star can be boring. And so I do think 3 stars, 2 stars, 1 stars. If I'm starting to have those vibes in my head, I can definitely put down a book and never pick it up again and never think about it again. I also have had moments where further into the storyline I've DNF'd where I'm 70%, 80% into a book and I decide to put it down. Most of the time when that happens though, it's because the book has done something that makes me mad. So if
Mm.
there's a character choice or a reveal that I really think makes the story either problematic or just makes me hate the things that I was loving about the story, I can see myself putting it down. We do want to get into the discussion, and I've heard that you have a synopsis for us on what we read for the pages for today.
Yes, well, I'll do my best. Basically, what takes place in this final third is a lead up to a climactic end in which we find out all that has happened, who murdered Alan, but it begins with more investigation and more obstacles for our main character, Sherry. In fact, at one point, Sherry is arrested because this demon, her, or should we say, Lord Thomas Cromwell, we'll get into that, ends up getting frustrated with the fact that, according to this demon, she isn't working hard enough. Even though I would argue she is investigating and going around. But, anyways, this is just an additional obstacle for Sherry to deal with. She ends up being arrested. Her friends have to work together to assist her in getting out of this situation. And then Sherry can continue with her investigation. And more so, there are two investigations going on. Obviously, she's continuing to figure out what happened to Alan, her boyfriend, and then she's also trying to figure out why Winesap is the way it is. She begins to remember certain blockages in her memory. For instance, why aren't we talking about the internet? Why does no one have cell phones? What is going on? Why does it feel as though you could look at someone and think they're in 1970 or in 2010? And these questions obviously lead back to the demon and how they've orchestrated this town to match a certain idealistic type of, scenario for them. And obviously, two and two make four, and she brings everyone together in the end in a very classic kind of whodunit style and points her finger at everybody until she eventually is able to reveal who the killer actually is. And after that point, we have another showdown. And that speaks to the fact that we are dealing with two mysteries or two conflicts. So after the showdown of revealing who actually killed Alan, she then has to face off with the demon, quote unquote, her, this unnamed entity that has been our puppeteer the entire time. And once that's completed, then I would argue we get into quite an extensive type of scene of closure where, she's kind of getting her ducks in a row. She ends up basically kind of confronting her issues and her residual feelings about Caroline, her best friend. And also, of course, we have this grouping of our demon hunting society who apparently want to, start investigating something that's going on in New Orleans. But I've been vague as far as, the reveals because we are going to get into it. But I think that is a good baseline from where we started off on. So let's kind of start off near the beginning. And Danny, how did you feel about Sherry going to jail?
I do want to talk about her going to jail, but before we talk about that, let's talk about the events that led up to that, the interrogation scene between her and Sheriff Brown. So Sheriff Brown comes to her door and tells her that he has questions for her. She goes with him downtown. They start their questioning scene or whatever. And to me, I felt like Sheriff Brown's character, and she even says this, his character has completely changed, like 180. She refers to him as Columbo, I think, is the reference
Mm-hmm.
that she made. And she's like, how does he, have all of have all of the answers all of a sudden and know all of like the twists and turns? And their interrogation switches at a certain point, and he gets very irritated with her and arrests her and throws her in a cell.
Right. I was intrigued by this interrogation scene mainly for what it represented. Do I think it reached its full potential? No. I enjoyed that we had this reference to Columbo. And you can see that this author knows her kind of daytime mystery television. We've got references to Jessica Fletcher for Murder She Wrote. Now we've got references to Columbo. There's been mentions of like Nordic noir scenes. And then, of course, like the Agatha Christie canon. And I, of course, also am familiar with Columbo. I grew up really enjoying him, and this idea of him saying one more thing and making his, guests, the people he's interrogating, sit back down and ask them like one more question that kind of cracks open the case and just gets under people's skin. So I appreciate that this author knows what she's talking about when we're referencing, these types of tropes and things that you would expect in pivotal characters of the genre. However, I wish that this character, Sherry, addressed it more thoroughly with the sheriff saying, "You are different," especially when not only do we have the switch of him not being this bumbling inspector who needs our amateur sleuth's help at every turn, but the fact that however many days ago, he had banged on her door, asked if she was going to help investigate, and they had this whole discussion where he clearly originally wanted her to assist. And then he's interrogating her saying, I wonder why you were in your boyfriend's apartment afterwards. And I was waiting for her to say, well, remember when you demanded that I start investigating? Well, I finally did. So why are you now angry? Like, I wanted them to kind of break the fourth wall and acknowledge that there is an inconsistency. And obviously, that inconsistency is linked to the demon that is causing havoc in this village. So I was a bit frustrated that we just kind of kept going through the motions. And then, yeah, the switch, I guess the third switch in the sheriff was suddenly the demon taking over his voice and saying, "You're annoying me because you're not investigating and not working hard. I'm going to throw you in jail." And it's like, what? But the sheriff was just saying that she was a suspect. And so I will say that interrogation scene was, I liked that it was implemented. I didn't like that it was how it was executed. I think it could have been done better.
Yeah, I think that it brought to light a lot of inconsistencies, as you were saying, within the characters, and even inconsistencies that the author did address, and then ones that they didn't address. There was a comment that the sheriff makes to Sherry really early on in that interrogation that says, "I don't believe that you wouldn't have known Alan was cheating on you, or Alan, not cheating on you, but like that Alan had a wife because you're really good at
Mhm.
solving mysteries." And I'm like, why are we pointing out the fact that our main character should be able to suss out all of these things? It almost felt like we were poking fun at the narrative, but then we also go back to taking ourselves seriously. I was very confused by that.
Yeah, we're kind of juggling this idea of this being satirical, of
Yes.
kind of making fun while also paying homage to the mystery genre. However, the poking fun also pokes holes in the plot, as you said, and they're not filled up to an appropriate degree where we can just kind of move forward and not be like, huh, wait, actually though, yeah, let's go back and talk about that because you've made a good point about why this narrative is not actually making sense. And we are seeing a lot of conveniences, I would argue, in this narrative as things are moving along. For instance, even the fact that she's thrown in jail and it's the flies that start talking to her. I was like, okay, this is, what are we doing here? I could not take that part seriously at all. And I don't know how you felt about that.
I guess I was just reminded by all of the horror novels that I've read recently that have flies, because eventually the fly ends up going into her mouth,
Yeah.
and that was the only I didn't really think anything other than, like, we're using a convenience once again, like, the same reason that we originally used Lord Thomas Cromwell to communicate with her. We are now using the flies because it's the only thing that is in the room with her, but other than that, I really didn't have any thoughts.
Why are we randomly having flies fly into her mouth and like consume her? It kind of doesn't really make sense. And actually, leading out of that scene, of course, she has witnesses. After the flies kind of dissipate, it's something that Father Barry says, and our Scooby Gang, which have not met for quite some time, by the way, they're doing a really horrible job keeping up with their meetings. They're there. Todd is there too, and he just kind of accepts that all of this is happening. I'm like, you are the only person in this group that didn't know about the demon problem, and now you're thoroughly entertained by this weird fly scenario. So that's something to unpack. But what I really want to get to is when the sheriff does end up showing up. He's kind of struggling to like regain control of himself and, let her out, and they're kind of watching him in pain. So it's in the middle of the scene, and it's his dialogue that is another convenience for me. It says, "Everyone in the room gave a kind of instinctive writhe of sympathy. Then Sheriff Brown locked eyes with Sherry again. Sherry," he said, suddenly urgent. "What happened to the internet?" Reality sneezed. "What?" Sherry said. "What?" Sheriff Brown said, looking just as confused as she felt. And that becomes such a pivotal thing that she suddenly becomes obsessed with trying to figure out what's going on with the internet. And I'm just like, this is so convenient. That was so random. It has nothing to do with anything that's going on in the scenario. Why would he say that?
Yeah, it's very out of the blue. I thought, as I was reading that, I did kind of pause. I think I even went back and re-listened to that section, and I was like, "Why are we all of a sudden talking about the internet? And what?" And then it does, it becomes this really pivotal thing that she can use. There's a hidden room in the library that she finds, it's really a computer lab that all of a sudden she has access to, which also doesn't make sense. It's another inconsistency, because the sheriff was talking about how the internet didn't work. Not that the internet didn't exist, the internet didn't work. but magically it works in the library, just in this
Mhm.
room that no one knows about and everyone avoids. And I'm like, that's not how that works. But okay. But it does, it becomes this really this part of how Sherry is continuing her investigation and being able to look into things and look into people. And it also is weird that we now have an outsider with Todd in the village itself, and we know that from Sherry, we know that a lot of the people within the town have lost touch with the outside world since she has been in the town, and so they were online and they were active with social media or whatever, but that has slowly tapered off as they've been in this town. But with Todd coming in, that was never addressed. Like, why is Todd not all of a sudden like, why, like, I have a whole bunch of messages on this black box that I carry around in my wallet. Oh, it's a phone. Because they also talk about not having phones and that no one realized that we have cell phones anymore.
Yeah, and, there's a moment where this just becomes so key, and it's very silly when Sherry suddenly is like, "Now that I look around at Winesap, it's so much stranger," and she starts looking at people's clothing and realizing that people could either be in 1970 or, like, 2024, and she realizes that the reason why she wants to laugh at Janine every time she looks at her is because she's only dressed as clearly she's in the 80s, and I'm just like, where is all of this coming from? This is so random. And I kind of wish that we had, again, had more emphasis earlier on in the book that it felt like this was maybe like a timeless village that,
Yeah,
acknowledging, because I never felt as though we weren't anywhere except for 2024. So then
yeah,
all of these details, and I was like, actually, a lot of books in 2024, authors purposefully avoid including technology because it can take readers out of it. So I didn't even bat an eye when we weren't seeing people Google things, or like when they said that they were going to call someone. I was never imagining two people on landlines. I imagined Sherry on a landline because she's of the older generation. A lot of older people do keep their landlines, and that's perfectly fine. I don't need to see everyone have a smartphone, so it feels a bit almost last minute realization. And I was like, oh, I this was an issue that I didn't even know existed.
yeah. The time jumping, or not time jumping, but like the fact that we have a timeless village, people who are in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and people are just stuck wherever their particular character is supposed to be, is something that could have been really cool. It could have
Mhm.
been something the author took at the very beginning and was describing what Janine was wearing and was describing what Charlotte was wearing. And maybe us as readers would have thought that that was just like the eccentricities of those characters. But then after this reveal that there is some type of a time warp within this village, it would have made sense. Whereas with how it was dealt with, I just felt like it was thrown in. There was no development towards it. It was just something we threw in to make the demon seem more all encompassing of the village, when I never really got that feeling throughout the first 67% of the book.
Right. And as you said, this could have been done really well. And I think that potentially, of course, we're not sure. The author isn't here to explain why she wrote it in the way that she did. But there can be an art to keeping your reader in the know while other characters are in the dark. We in those descriptions could be like, yeah, that is weird that, Janine is the only person who seems to be firmly in the 80s. And then we have characters who are clearly, presenting themselves in a different decade. And in the narrative style, having Sherry just like not batting an eye, whereas, the author is kind of doing a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. And we're in on it with the author, waiting for, the penny to drop, and suddenly Sherry is like, "Wait a second. Why am I in this Truman Show world?" And that could be very funny. It could be a great moment of relief as we watch her kind of realize things that we've already seen. Whereas her realizing and seeing things that we never saw, it doesn't have any effect. It doesn't add anything because I was like, "You're telling us this is happening," and I'm like, "Oh, I didn't know that that was happening. Okay,
Right.
I guess it's not this pivotal reveal as maybe it was meant to be."
Yeah. I agree. Okay, so we've discussed the interrogation, the jail scene, some inconsistencies that we're seeing. Now, let's move forward in the plot where we have Sherry being released from jail. The thing that irritated me about this is she's then allowed to continue to investigate. And the sheriff specifically tells her that she's still a suspect. Like, yeah, you're on my list of people that could potentially have killed Alan. You're actually a really good suspect because you also inherited his house. And even though you quote unquote didn't know that, I mean that is a motive for murder. And he's like, "But continue to investigate." And I'm like, "What?" I mean, there are so many, and I'm not in law enforcement, I'm not in law, and so maybe I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I'm not, that any evidence that is handled outside of a court of law and, the proper means of transferring evidence is considered unreliable, especially if it's handled by someone who is a suspect.
Right. Like, the question then would be, well, did you plant this? This is
Right,
convenient for you to provide it. And it's just, it shows that that entire scene also was kind of like, there's no point to it. Why was she in jail? The
right.
only reason why was to get that question about the internet. It ended up being really stupid because then, like, again, he goes back on his word and returns to the idea of, I want you to keep investigating. When he's Columbo now, he doesn't need any help. He can just solve it himself. Like, why not just keep him being Columbo? Let's switch to his perspective. I think I'd rather be there anyway. And yeah, then she continues to do her very weird methodical research. And I do remember there being knowledges of the door that nobody goes into. Like, we were getting those hints, and I kind of got distracted by the fact that other random things were happening. So then when we return to that, I'll acknowledge that that was, a clue, that was a breadcrumb that we then finally returned to. But yeah, the fact that it was this computer lab, and what she does is she creates a finstagram. She creates like a fake Instagram, I think it was, and it's called I'm Brandon 1992. And I will say that a lot of it was quite humorous, but then we're just seeing this like very quick research that kind of proves too that it's not that impressive. I don't know. I feel as though if all you had to do was go on someone's Instagram to realize that two people are connected, you can't call yourself this impressive investigator, because she ends up realizing through, I think it's Corey's Instagram. And for those of you, who are reading this and trying to juggle all these characters, Corey is one of the sons of Alan and Susan. So Alan, our murder victim, Susan, his wife that he separated from. Corey is known for being terrible with money. He lives lavishly, and part of that's because his dad's a millionaire, and we all just kind of accept that as well. He's like super rich. And Corey's also someone who's been in quote unquote the wrong crowd, mainly because he hangs out with friends that are beyond his means, and he's, not comfortable, I guess, like being honest that he doesn't have any money. The other thing is he had potential because he's been working with his dad at the antique business, and Alan was thinking that one day Corey would take over because he's doing so good at finding these valuable antiques and business is flourishing. Well, when we look at Corey's Instagram while he's on yachts and just, living the lavish lifestyle, I think it's a comment that tips Sherry off that Todd knows Corey. And then she's like, huh, okay, well, when they arrived and Todd was with them, like on the train upstate, they suggested that they had just met, when clearly Todd and Corey do know each other. They were friends. And that's pretty much what she ends up kind of uncovering. There's probably other details she found on the internet, beyond her just realizing that everyone had a social media presence until they suddenly didn't. And the link is her arrival into town. She does acknowledge that, and I think it was the sheriff that says this, that this town was normal until you arrived. So it's clearly Sherry that has, been among the catalysts to cause the village to suddenly drop off the face of the earth. So we do get that through the internet, but yeah, I don't know. I wasn't as impressed with this whole idea of like using Instagram to be like, oh, they're friends. Okay, cool. And then I think she goes on, doesn't she go to like the diner with her friends? And that's when she starts to be uncertain about Todd. She questions if Father Barry is working with him or being dishonest.
I think that was the Todd thought was from Mary, because after she leaves the computer lab at the library, Mary, the town gossip or whatever, stops her and talks to her about Father Barry going to the rich older lady's house and staying there until after midnight. And I think
Right.
that was what spurred some of the suspicion of Todd, because he is Barry's twin brother, and so technically it could have been him, and we eventually find out that it was him,
Mhm.
like impersonating his brother. But then we have Sherry going to investigate Jason, the neighborhood that Jason lives in, and asking around to see if he maybe was out and about at the time of Alan's murder. And Father Barry wants to go with her, and she doesn't know if she
Mhm.
wants to share information with him because at this point she's still a little hesitant. She doesn't know if it's him working with Todd or if it's just Todd himself, and so we have a little interaction with them too. But in that neighborhood scene, really all we find out is that the elderly woman who lives next door, or I don't even know if maybe she wasn't elderly, but she is an insomniac and doesn't sleep well, and so she said that Jason couldn't have been out and about during that night because the dog next door barks. He couldn't have walked anyway because the dog barks next door and would have woken her up that evening. And then we also find
Right.
out that he also couldn't have driven because he has a car that has a broken muffler that she has been hearing around town. That was another thing that the author did put breadcrumbs in. We have heard that vehicle, the loud popping noises around town that sounded like someone was driving a motorcycle, and it ended up being Jason's truck. So that little investigation essentially clears his name, which I did appreciate. I really didn't want it to be him.
Yeah, and I feel like it would have been crazy if it was him. I feel like that would have been it wouldn't have made sense. I did appreciate though, like you said, this background noise of, a motorcycle going about town, realizing it's actually Jason. Now, could we have ever on our own been like that's Jason's car? No. We weren't allowed that, but we were provided basically the details to support what Sherry is saying. And then of course we have Jason confirming, yes, I'm trying to get the muffler fixed. You can talk to the mechanic in town. So we did get that. But yes, so we end up getting this confirmation that okay, couldn't have been Jason. Great, moving forward. And then after some investigating, we might as well just move on to the reveal scene where Sherry ends up contacting everyone. She has the sheriff, Susan, her two sons, Eli and Corey, and she also does look into their alibis and things. That's among her investigations. She invites Jason, the cook, who we've just been talking about, and why we already know he clearly didn't do it. She invites Alice. We also have the Scooby Gang, the Demon Hunting Society present. So Charlotte, Janine, Father Barry, his brother Todd. We just got a big group. And I will say there is a moment of annoyance that I had as Sherry was doing this. And I think she may have been talking to Janine as they were getting things settled.
Oh, is it when she told Janine that she absolutely wasn't a suspect, that everyone else was?
Oh no. Oh, we can get into that too though. For me, it was when she was telling oh, actually yes. It was literally it's the same section, but it's what she says right after that. So Janine hugged her gently back. What did you do? Called all of my suspects and asked them to come here, Sherry said. A small hysterical little laugh escaped her chest. Not you, your moral support. Most of the rest of them are suspects. I'm pulling a Poirot. A what? Janine asked and pulled back to look at her. And then they're kind of going back and forth about what that means. And Sherry, who's apparently such an expert at mysteries and knows all of the references, she ends up discussing. And anyways, Janine says, "Where are we?" Janine gave Sherry a look that told her exactly what she thought of Sherry trying to be clever. So he's coming? That's something. We don't want to end up with bodies in the library because it's at the library. And this is Sherry's response. That was a Poirot, I think, Sherry said, with another helpless giggle. Or a Miss Marple? I don't remember. But I'll try to make it the opposite. No bodies in the library this evening. Sherry, you don't know if it's a Miss Marple or a Poirot? You disgust me. For shame. Of course it's Miss Marple. What are you talking about? I was so annoyed when I read that part, and I was like, I know that this doesn't make any sense, that I am this infuriated, but I was like, you are literally like the person who keeps making references, and you don't know that the body in the library is a Miss Marple book. Oh gosh, Sherry, go away.
I have never read Miss Marple, so I cannot be infuriated with you, but it is funny that you noticed that.
Yeah, I was like, that's not funny. I know this is supposed to be a joke. I'm not laughing, Sherry. Ugh. Anyway.
I will say, out of everything in the last, like this episode encompasses, I did like the scene where everyone comes together. I think it's kind of dumb. Like, why is everyone coming to the library at your beck and call? But whatever. If I get past that and everyone's there and she's going through the information that she's gathered and all the scenarios that could lead to a killer, I did like that. That was interesting to see all of the pieces kind of coming together. I just wish there would have been more breadcrumbs throughout the story that we could have also determined a lot of the things that she ends up coming up with, because I feel like a lot of what she says, we have no idea as readers. We are just taking her name or her word for it because we didn't get to see the clues.
Right, because everyone, of course, naturally has secrets, and that is to be expected. I also really enjoyed this scene because I do enjoy when a detective pulls a Poirot, as it's described, when everyone is brought together. And I think it could have been a bit more meta, where, people are saying, why would you bring us here? Why do you want me to come to the library? And Sherry breaks the fourth wall and saying, because that's what the narrative requires of me, because
Yeah.
and having the demon just again playing kind of fun at the demon who is clearly writing a really bad TV script. So I'm on board for that, but I agree that I don't think there was any way for us to know that cocaine was involved. Obviously there was illegal activity. I was predicting that it was simply falsified antiques, or maybe money laundering was
Yeah.
involved. But the idea of them hiding within the frames cocaine, I just kept thinking,
It's very random.
um yeah, like, okay, I guess we'll just accept that that's happening. And there was this whole backstory about Mr. Kaminsky, I should say, who worked with Corey and Todd. And yes, that's the group. Those are the threesome who, are the drug traffickers. And apparently he had previously, been, arrested and decided to continue with drug trafficking or something crazy like that. And I was just like, we wouldn't have known this. This is really kind of convenient and just absolutely silly. And then we get to Alice. And you recall, I kept saying, what's with this Alice character? She's important, but she keeps being left, at arm's length.
Yeah.
And it's because we've decided that she must be the killer. But even that is so flimsy because the thing is again, everything that Sherry learns is thanks to the fact that she had access to the internet. She had to do a quick Google search of Alice and then discovers that she was a ski instructor when she was in high school or something. That, again, is only thanks to randomly finding this room that, like you said, is the only place that happens to have the internet in the entire town. And also, I thought it was really important for us to have known that Alice has like a 3-year-old daughter that is staying with her mother, and she is working to regain custody. There was just so many characteristics to Alice's character that we're never told. So I did find that frustrating. I wasn't surprised that it ended up being Alice because I'm like, yep, that sounds about right. That's why we never saw her. But the reasonings behind it were stuff that we should have known about her life that we were never given.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Her being the murderer too was just, I felt like it was a little too convenient. I wish that there would have been more to it other than her obviously not wanting to lose her job because of her kid, but I don't know. I feel like it's a murder that could have been avoided, and I know that that's true for a lot of murders. It could have been avoided just with communication. And there's this thing that Sherry keeps saying in that scene that everyone is their own protagonist. And she's like, everyone is only ever paying attention to themselves and they're in their own story. And so they're not paying attention to how their actions are affecting other people, which ties back into the fact that Alan had no idea that Alice was thinking she was going to get fired because he was paying attention to the fact that his sons were having this issue, which I appreciate, but I felt like it was almost pushed in to help us be okay with the fact that this is Alice and this is all the mystery is that it was her.
Yeah, and I like that inclusion, the idea of it being like everyone views
Yeah,
themselves as the main character of their story, especially when we're dealing with a lot of like stories within stories, kind of meta literature. But I don't find Sherry to be an impressive character. I don't like her. I genuinely don't believe that she would have the ability to solve this mystery. I know she
yeah,
has, but I still don't find it satisfying. So for her to be this philosophical character, giving us a soliloquy about our own perspectives of our lives, I'm like, shut up, Sherry. Like you are not like I don't want to get any type of wisdom from you right now because I just don't think she's the right character to be delivering those lines.
yeah,
She is not someone that I found should I think that she should have been written. I said this in the last episode that she should have been written as someone bumbling and like stumbling upon it,
yeah,
learning and like not being this star of the show when everything has been fabricated up into this point that she shouldn't be as confident as she is and she shouldn't be dropping wisdom bombs at the end of this book. So even though I appreciated that, I think this was the wrong narrative style and the wrong main character to be saying that, which is really unfortunate because I do like that idea of an explanation that everyone is not realizing that they're impacting others. And so it's not about them. It could be about something else, but we're
right.
all just wrapped up in our own issues. Like that is a good theme to have.
Yeah,
I just don't think it's as powerful as it could be because of the book that we're working with. So that yeah, that just kind of didn't work out for me because then what does that even mean about Caroline? Someone that we haven't even touched upon in this episode yet. I will say I remain annoyed that Caroline is a character utilized to obviously show that like people can lie and should we be trusting people that are close to us. The fact that Sherry feels guilt because she aided Caroline, not necessarily in killing her husband but helping her get away.
yeah,
She allowed Caroline to give her a significant amount of money to basically remain quiet once they were realizing everything. And at its heart, I'm frustrated that we are utilizing domestic violence as this horrible woman. Look, she lied about her husband mentally, emotionally, physically abusing her so that she could get away and like take all of his money and basically be the classic gold digger, when in reality, when we leave these pages, the bigger concern is that people aren't believed, that those who are in partnerships that do experience mental, emotional, physical abuse, they aren't believed, or they don't feel that they have the strength or the ability, the resources to get out of this situation because our system, as far as like the law, doesn't help them in that way. So I personally find that really frustrating when I read a book and it is utilized in this way to be like, see, there are women out there who will lie about this, and
yeah,
I find that really disgusting.
yeah. I also so I don't like the messaging behind it, but also it did nothing for the story. If you took
No.
everything about Caroline out of this book, it wouldn't change anything, which is frustrating. It was additional information in page time that we could have spent developing other things and making the other parts of the story make more sense. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the other big reveal at the end of the
Yeah.
story. So, after she solves the murder, Alice is carted away. We have a moment where she's like, "I want everyone to leave the room because I need to address some things," which everyone's like, "Okay." And then they
Like
leave and they just
weirdo.
go in the other room and wait. And she's like, "I need an explanation." And then all of a sudden, her appears in the shape of Caroline, I think, is what
Yeah,
she
in,
originally
like, the way
saw.
she sees Caroline as this,
Yeah.
like, gorgeous, ethereal thing, and not stupid, that type of like, "It always comes back to Caroline," and I'm like, "Yeah, that's an issue. Go to
I was thinking
therapy." Like, what are you anyway.
I was thinking for a split second that it was gonna be Caroline, that all of these
Mhm,
people, like, the beginning of the story and all of the, ominous events with Caroline killing her husband and all that stuff was gonna be this demon has been with, Sherry for all of her life, and we're just now realizing it, and then it was just like, "Oh, no, I just picked this shape because it would impact you," and I was like, "Okay," and then I have so the explanation the demon gives Sherry for why Sherry is the chosen one really frustrated me because
mhm.
it literally means nothing. So let me read this quote to you as we determine why her has chosen Sherry to make the pinnacle of all of her stories.
Take it away.
It says, "You were bored," is what Sherry tells her because the creature admits that she's bored and she wants stories. Yes, it looked pleased that she understood. "I'm so bored. I ran out of stories. There's so much more time than stories. All I had was time. Time and a little bit of power over the minds of these little persons. So I decided to make my own stories." And then Sherry says, "I wondered. It seemed like that." What? And then she continues, "But why wine sap? You were perfect. A librarian. That's perfect. I wanted a librarian. I had to look a long time to find you, a librarian who knows about the stories." I'm sorry, are you telling me the one person in the world who knows mysteries is Sherry? What?
Yeah, then you know what? Choose a mystery writer. What are you talking about? It also doesn't match anything because this demon, this character, is obsessed with, characters and the perfect detective. There aren't that many librarian examples. Like there choose a writer. Like I said, like Jessica Fletcher was a writer, or choose an actual detective, like police procedural. There are so many other things. And then in reaction, girl, you are floating in a library right now. Pick up a book. What are you talking about? You and I complain all the time how publishing keeps publishing new books and we just can't keep up. Do not tell me you've run out of stories. Literally, the publishing industry would beg to differ. That was so silly. And her just saying, oh, perfect, a librarian who knows the stories. Actually, Sherry isn't that well read. She did not
No.
suggest that she's very like a lot of her references were the TV versions, which is actually hilarious because like Columbo, yes, Jessica Fletcher has books, as does Agatha Christie, but numerous times she was referencing the television shows, not the
Yeah.
actual books. So this librarian is actually really she doesn't read. What are we talking about here?
And then we have, like, the pivotal scene where Sherry takes it upon herself to well, she says that she's not gonna play the game anymore, she's done, and the demon's like, "Well, I can make you," and she's like, "No, you can't," and all of a sudden the demon's inside her, making her move, and Sherry's like, "Oh, I have my steak in my pocket, the you steak that I made," and she stabs herself, supposedly in the heart, and the demon's like, "Oh, I am going to die because you think I should," and so at this point, I'm thinking, "Oh, this author's, like, gonna kill off Sherry." But no, Sherry survives. 'Cause she didn't actually stab herself in the heart, but apparently it was enough that the demon thought that it was dead, but it's not dead because she then tells her that she'll see her again.
Yeah,
What?
it only, like, counts because she believes in it, so it's like none
Yes.
of this matters, and yeah, I hated that, and of course, what's linked to it is as she's recovering, Lord Thomas Cromwell comes to visit her, and she then asks, "Should I call?" 'Cause basically, Lord Thomas Cromwell is like, "I owe you," because remember, he supposedly tried to eat her, and then her as in like capital H her, whoever this entity is, which we know who it is. He is like, oh, because you helped me, if you call my name with meaning, I will appear. And she asks him, because, and I think there's even a mention where it says, and she thinks she's very clever. She says, should I use that name or should I use your real name? And, you know, then the cheeky demon kind of says something like, oh, ha, ha, well, you know, whatever it is, I'll come, and then leaves. And like, my understanding, that means, yeah, it's the same freaking person. The her demon who pretended to be Caroline is Lord Thomas Cromwell. It's all the same being, just for entertainment purposes, but like done in a really weird way.
I still don't know. There's still not clarity for that for me because I feel like the other name was Lucifer, right? She originally called him Lucifer. And so
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know if it's the same being, and I honestly don't care. At this point, like it could be the same being, it cannot be the same being. I still think the whole premise is dumb.
Yeah, I'm obviously not into this book. This was a really frustrating read to its end pages, but I suppose since we've reached the end, the question is there going to be a sequel that follows a vampire in New Orleans? Because that's the way it ended.
Oh, 100%. I think it's going to be a sequel. I also didn't like that because they connected it to like the demon wanting different stories.
Hmm.
So Sherry's storyline was a mystery, and now we have vampires in New Orleans that are whatever killing people. But then the coven of witches that's in New Orleans somehow contacts Sherry because Sherry knows how to deal with it because they think it's the same entity. And I'm like, why? Why would you think it was? Who's Sherry? Like, who knows Sherry?
What are you talking about? And actually, you know what? I think I moved too quickly to that because then I just remembered the explanation was that all of these deaths was like a random bus accident. And
Yes, yes. And everyone in the town was drugged. They said there was some type of poisoning happening, and that's why no one can remember. And there's all these time jumps. And the 16 people who were murdered, who were actually murdered by people who are in prison, were killed in a bus. That's the story that we're telling the whole world because we don't want the FBI to come knocking that there have been 16 murders in a small town.
like what is happening? Like what kind of explanation is that? I did think it was so funny when he was explaining this. Oh, we were right. It was like ergot poisoning or something. And she said, "Oh, so nobody died." He's like, "No, they're dead." Like that can't undo that. And I was like, "Okay, fine. Like we can change all the rules. The one thing we can't do is actually make these people not dead anymore." Like I don't know. Like the okay. Like that just seems so silly for it to be everything else is like a bit of a happily ever after, except for these 16 dead bodies that are just gonna
Yep.
continue to be there.
Well, is there anything else we want to discuss before we answer our 3 questions?
I honestly, we probably could keep talking, but I think we need to stop. Well, we need to
Yes.
stop. Let's answer these 3 questions and just be done with this book.
So our 3 questions, we always give a rating, and now we can actually rate the book in its entirety. We also talk about our favorite character. You know, in this case, we could talk about our favorite character specifically for these pages or for the entire book, whatever we want to do. And then we usually end on a question, but maybe instead of a question that we still have, or a question that's going to be answered in leading pages, which we obviously don't have because it's the end of the book, we can do questions that weren't answered that we wish were.
I like that. Okay, so then I'll go first. My rating, it's a 1 star. Like this book is not good. It's actually, I will say it's fascinating to consider how our rating decreased as we went, because you can tell that there was potential in this book. I mean, we were considering it like, you know, mid to high 3 star range. I think you were on like a 3.75. I was at a 4 at the start of this, and it just shows how it just goes down. So just because there's an excellent premise, the execution is really what we are dependent on when it comes to our ratings. And yeah, this is a 1 star. I could not recommend this to anyone. I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that, especially if someone says they're interested in mysteries. I'd be like, stay away from this book, because I find it insulting. As a mystery reader, I'm actually really annoyed by it, that it exists and that people are, reading this book. So then, as far as my favorite character goes, I mean, they all were people I hated at this point. Like, I couldn't take any of them seriously. So, you know who I'm going to do a callback to? Louie. She was this random woman that Cherry talked to one time. And you know what? She wasn't on page enough for me not to like her. And I still remember this one description of her, that she was like this older woman who liked her detectives hard boiled. And I was like, she seems fun. Like, I like Louie. And literally, we probably only had a couple paragraphs with her. So she's my favorite character, I'll say, just to give something. And then the final questions that we may have. Is it bad to say I don't have any questions because I don't care anymore? Whatever. I don't care. I suppose a question that I could pose is more so like, where are we going with this idea of a demon, Lucifer, Lord Thomas Cromwell, her/Caroline? Is there ever going to be an ending? How is this relationship with Sherry going to progress, especially if they think that this entity is the same reason for the deaths in New Orleans? Because then when she goes there, we're just going to read the same book in which she, tricks the demon in the end, and then that demon goes off to another place, and then she follows them. I don't understand where we're going with this relationship dynamic, if that's going to be the pivotal through line for what seems to be a series.
Well, I will agree with your rating. This is a 1 star for me. I am hoping that I will never think about this book again. That is my hope. I'm not a fan. I would not recommend this for fantasy readers either. I would argue that this whole book could have been done without fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And it probably would have been better because we wouldn't have had all the weird inconsistencies because of the demon, but whatever, I digress. The second question, I don't really enjoy any character in this book. And I think you stole the only one that I really did think that Louis was fun. If I had to pick like one of the main cast of characters, I think that Father Barry probably would have been my favorite out of the cast, just
Mm-hmm.
because he seemed fairly genuine. But I didn't really enjoy anybody. I could have lived without all of them, ever doing any of them. And then a question that I wish would have been answered.
Pause for the silence.
Yes.
I have another one that you may find interesting. Like, in the second book that you and I will definitely not read, by the way, friends, like, if that wasn't clear, we're not reading it. So this question, I don't care if it's never answered. Are we going to have a possessed cat later on? Like, how?
Yeah, so that would be interesting. Is she going to call on Lord Thomas again, or is it going to be a different cat? Yeah,
Is she
I
going to
guess
put her
I
cat
could.
in like the carrier and take the cat to New Orleans with her?
I guess I would be interested, which I'm not going to read the sequel, as you said, but if the demon can be killed, because
Mm.
clearly even a stake to the, vicinity of your heart is not enough. I don't know. I guess that would be, where is the series going to end? If this is going to be a series, how is it going to be driven to a conclusion if we have an entity who literally can't die? So, that's probably where I would end it.
Yeah. Well, sounds good. Friends at home, if you absolutely adored this book, then you are within your rights to do so. Even though Danny and I didn't enjoy this, I hope that you appreciated our discussion in these 3 parts. And I also hope that you are getting excited for our book for next month. In February, we are reading The Day of the Triffids. This is a classic sci-fi horror novel, so we're continuing with this season's theme of genre blends. And check us out every Friday, and be sure to put your holds in for that book, or go ahead and buy it yourself if you're interested. But thanks everyone. We'll see you next Friday. Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Not Reading for Content. Be sure to check the description for a schedule of our upcoming reads for this season. For reminders and other updates, you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Not Reading for Content. Where else can the listeners find you, Leandra?
I have a booktube and an Instagram. My booktube is at Leandra the TBR0, and my Instagram is at Leandra_the TBR0. How about you, Danny?
I have the same platforms. Both can be found at Danny.dabbles. Thanks again for listening. Don't forget to tune in next Friday for our next episode.